Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar hosted by the Social Finance Topical Interest Group of the American Evaluation Association. My name is Heather Esper, and I'm with the William Davidson Institute at the University of Michigan. I'm also serving as a webinar co-chair of the Social Finance Topical Interest Group this year. To help everyone get to know each other, we appreciate if you could rename yourself on Zoom to include your name and your organization name. For those of you that aren't familiar, the American Evaluation Association is a professional association of evaluators devoted to the application and exploration of evaluation as a profession. We have over 6,000 members representing all 50 states, as well as more than 80 foreign countries. The Social Finance Thematic Interest Group, called the SFTIG for short, is a group within AEA of members, we're all volunteer-led, who are interested in the topic of social impact measurement and management and exploring the interplay between the social and financial return of investments. We come from many backgrounds, from evaluators to evaluation commissioners, investors to investees. Membership in our TIG means that you want to learn more about evaluating the social impact of organizations that are aiming to produce both the social and a financial return. Whether you're at the forefront of this work or just learning about it, we welcome members. I'll put some information about these different groups in the chat after I finish introductions. All of our webinars are recorded, as is this one, and you can find them on our website. Each webinar in our 2024 series will touch on the 2024 AEA conference theme, which revolves around amplifying and empowering voices. And today we have a very exciting webinar focused on amplifying and empowering underrepresented voices in business through evaluation. Before I introduce our wonderful panelists, I want to share our next webinar is scheduled for June 25th at 11 a.m. If you're an impact investor or an evaluator, you won't want to miss learning best practices from these change makers. In the webinar, several impact investors and signatories of the impact principles will share their best practices on implementing Principle 8, which is review, document, and improve decisions and processes based on the achievement of impact and lessons learned. And they'll also be sharing some key challenges and success factors. And now, without further ado, I want to go back. There we go. I would like to introduce today's speakers in the order that they're going to present. We're very lucky to have with us Noemí. She's co-founder of QB, works with companies like Bumble, Ben & Jerry's, Verizon, Upwork, and Paramount to set ESG targets, engage stakeholders, develop actionable strategies, and communicate impact thoughtfully. She has over 15 years of experience in corporate communications, stakeholder engagement, strategy, branding, and market research. Today, she will use a people-first lens to highlight their ethical, inclusive corporate community engagement process and the philosophy behind their stakeholder engagement that doesn't suck guide. If you haven't read it, please check it out. Janie is from Brico Works and the Entrepreneur Fund, and she draws on 15 plus years of experience to champion change efforts in impact organizations. She designs participatory approaches in program design, operations, impact measurement, and communications, ensuring all stakeholders are active participants and their perspectives are valued in driving social change. Janie will share how she built impact literacy within a CDFI and iteratively designed a framework by bringing along different voices. This process resulted in team buy-in and the team feeling empowered to use the framework. And our third panelist is Yakuta, a program manager at the William Davidson Institute at the University of Michigan. She works on complex measurement, gender, and strategy challenges for mission-driven companies. She has over 13 years of experience in mixed methods measurement and has also honed her skills in lean thinking practices and gender lens investing research. Today, she will share how women-inclusive ROI calculations can help elevate women's voices and needs to leadership while benefiting the business. So as I mentioned, each panelist will speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll use the remaining time for discussion. So be sure to have your questions and ideas, experiences on stakeholder engagement ready. And please feel free to share any of your questions and ideas in the chat as the presenters are speaking. As panelists are able during the first half of our time together, they can answer questions in the chat, but I'll keep a running list and I'll be moderating the Q&A at the end. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Noemí.
Thanks, Heather, and thank you all for joining. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and talk to you a little bit about stakeholder engagement that doesn't suck. Can you see that? Full
Yes, we
screen?
can. Yep.
Oh, perfect.
Oh, it's not full screen, sorry, but I can see it.
What do you see? Hold on. Are you able to see? What do you see now?
Nothing right now.
Okay, let me share it again. Okay, what do you see now? You see the
We
full
see your
screen?
desktop and the slides on the right. I think it should be fine. This just has like your top banner and the bottom banner, but as long as like it should, well, I think we can see the text fine on the slides if you don't, if it's going to be tricky to put it full screen.
Here, let me try one more time and then we'll just
Yeah,
go with what we get.
no worries. I know we tested it and it worked great.
Here,
So we know it's possible.
what
There
about
you
now?
go. Perfect. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk to you about stakeholder engagement that doesn't suck. Thank you for the intro again, Heather. This is a white paper. This is kind of a white paper that summed up a year-long research study. And I'm going to try to give you the highlights in the 10 minutes that I have. And I'm going to set a timer because sometimes I can be long-winded. So Heather, feel free to like wave if I'm going too long. So just as a quick background on QB, so we, as Heather mentioned, work with all kinds of different organizations. Everything that we do, all the work that we do, whether it's materiality assessment, stakeholder engagement, creating strategy roadmaps, setting goals and targets for companies, or doing any kind of reporting work, everything is with the people first lens. So we have that kind of lens in everything that we do with our clients and also in the way we operate internally. So I'm very excited to get the opportunity to be on this panel and talk to other kind of like-minded people who are thinking about the same challenges. So just to give a little bit of background on the study and what we were brought in to do with our client's a global multinational telecommunications company. They're a massive company. When they brought us in, they were sort of replacing us. They were replacing their market research firm with us. And I think they had come to the realization that in order to get deep insights in their community, they needed to kind of throw the rule book out the window and try something a little bit different. So their goal with this project and our remit was to try to understand the day-to-day, kind of like the key pain points that people living in communities that are most affected by climate change experience on a daily basis. So they wanted to understand what are the immediate and downstream effects of climate change. And they also wanted to understand where they could play a role in helping to mitigate those based on their core competencies, based on their reputation. So they wanted to understand also their social license to operate, right? Like how are they viewed in the community? And how does the community want them to show up? So what role should they be playing when they do kind of come into a community as outsiders and as a big corporation? And so the goal of this, again, like year-long study that we did entering 5 markets across the US was to gather data, primary research to inform the forthcoming strategy, so this project happened in 2021 and we built the strategy 22 to 23. And then this year we've been working on implementation. So it's actually come full circle and we're working on the implementation using the insights and working still with stakeholders that we began engaging in 2021 in one pilot market. So that was the whole goal, was to be able to inform their climate equity investment, which is significant. And they wanted to make sure that it was not misguided and that it was truly informed by community voices and that they were building solutions with communities and not for communities. And so the way we conducted our research is a little bit different to what they had done in the past. And so fortunately, they were an amazing partner that was very understanding that in doing things different and in kind of breaking the mold, there would be a lot of lessons learned along the way. So for us, and again, this white paper was written at the end of this first phase of the engagement, so there were a lot of things that were learned along the way, and it's all packed into this, into the white paper, which I'm happy to share afterwards. The 10 kind of make or break things that we landed on are these. So the first is to do your homework, and this is something that we were intent on before we entered any market. We conducted an in-depth desk research exercise. So we created a landscape analysis for each market to really understand what we were walking into, what the existing kind of organizations on the ground were. We looked at Facebook groups to understand kind of what the chatter was around climate change and climate justice. We looked at where the election, like what had happened with the elections in each of the markets. We looked at what kinds of climate disasters were more common. So we did significant research on demographics and all sorts of things before we even started entering the market with a real presence. We called local businesses. And then, so the first thing is do your homework and make sure that you're informed before you're entering communities, especially communities that are more likely to be wary of outsiders coming in. Our second non-negotiable is to pay people for their time. So this group, probably it's an echo chamber here, but there are often these sorts of exercises can be extractive. And so it was very important for us to make sure that there was alignment with the client and that there was a budget behind paying people for the time and for the value that they were providing. Their insights are valuable. This third phase of this project would not exist had we not had people participating. And so we made sure that we were paying fair rates to people for their participation. We also partnered on this project with the World Institute on Disability and with some other partners, but they were the biggest one, to make sure that everything that we did was designed with inclusion at the center. So obviously, if you make something accessible to people with disabilities, then everybody can access it. And so that was the goal of centering accessibility. So we had our team go through multiple trainings with the World Institute on Disability in terms of how to lead a Zoom call inclusively. And we made sure that we had translators and we made sure that we had interpreters available. And so we made sure that we're kind of thinking of all the things so that anyone would be welcome and able to participate. We also, our fourth one is to practice flexibility. So we were really intent on, some of the communities that we worked with are not often kind of looking at their calendar or are not always as literate in use of certain technologies. And so our team was incredibly flexible in terms of, if calls were missed or if people were late or if there were tech issues. We upfront provided all of the resources and support for people to be able to participate. So for some communities, because the communities that we were reaching that are most affected by climate change include people living with disabilities, senior citizens, Black and Brown communities, shut-in people who are kind of isolated and living on their own, people where English is not their first language. And so these were kind of the main communities that we were targeting. For some of these communities, for some individuals, there's not as much technology literacy. And so we provided guides on how to use Zoom, how to participate, how to, what kind of space to be in. And also when calls were missed or canceled, we made sure that we accommodated that. And we also offered from the get-go different options for people to join. So it's not just during the 9 to 5. We offered weekend slots, we offered nighttime slots, understanding that people's work schedules vary, and we wanted to make sure we captured all types of input. And then this is a big one. There's a whole section on the white paper on this. Whenever we conduct a big stakeholder engagement project like this, we want to make sure that there is budget and that we have the resources to hire people from the local communities, people who are already doing the work, people who already have clout and have a network in those communities, and partnering with them, allowing them to play a crucial role in facilitating the conversation. So for this project with this particular client, all of the community engagement specialists, so we had 2 in each market, so we had 10 total, were all from the local community. Some of them were born and bred and others had been working in the community for years. we looked for people who had backgrounds in social work. We found people in academia who were studying, community engagement, community impact, people on the nonprofit side. So people who were already working in the communities that we were trying to access and had a deep understanding that we could not bring as outsiders coming into some of these communities. And we've stayed engaged with some of those people up until this third phase, which has been amazing. And this next one on engaging facilitators who get it kind of touches on what I just mentioned in terms of how we hired people and how we decided whether they were a fit for this project. We also believe in setting clear expectations. So really, I talked a little bit before about how people in the communities that we were trying to access are wary of outsiders, understandably so. They've been burned multiple times. And so they're not always, they're not sure of what they're going to get by contributing to projects like this one. And so we worked with Ethical Systems, which is a think tank connected to NYU Stern, to help design a process that really set very clear expectations from the beginning in terms of what people were going to get from this study and what the study was not. So to make sure that they knew what they were giving and what they were getting out of it from the get-go. And so we were not burning any bridges. We didn't have anyone upset that we were not meeting their expectations because everything was set very clearly from the beginning. This next one of keeping the door open is making sure that we made sure that there's a very a good channel of communication between the client and our community. So obviously we were brought in to kind of be that in between and be a conduit. But we also wanted to make sure that there were multiple opportunities for conversation to flow both ways and for questions to not just come from our client, but to also come from our community to our client that has a presence in all of the 5 markets that we were engaging stakeholders in. In terms of setting the tone, so making sure that everyone, again, knows what this study is trying to achieve and that we are not, yes, we are representing the corporate entity, but we are our own, and that's why I think we were brought in, is kind of like our reputation. We are our own voice in the space, and we are a neutral party that's just trying to facilitate a conversation between the 2 stakeholders for an agreed upon outcome. And then the last one, which kind of goes without saying, but is also the most important one, is kind of being human and really taking the time to listen. I think the term stakeholder engagement has become convoluted and turned into jargon, and really just what it is listening to people and listening to each other. And so this is one of our one of the ones that doesn't need really an explanation. So I know I'm slightly over time. I'll try to get through this quickly. The takeaways here is just that after going into the 5 markets, really emphasizing to our client and to, readers of this white paper that justice is not a one-size-fits-all, even though, climate change is affecting everyone. It affects people differently. And so the programs and the solutions that need to be created need to be very, very, very tailored and bespoke to each community. Even within one market, there were communities experiencing things in very, very different ways. And so acknowledging that and understanding that solutions cannot be applied in a blanket way, but need to be very tailored was one of the big takeaways. Again, I talked about accessibility in language. We felt like that was not a nice to have, but that was a requirement. And so that's kind of a non-negotiable for us moving forward in any projects. And then social license to operate is linked to long-term investment. So for us, if one of our clients is trying to enter a community and kind of conduct a study like this, we want to make sure that there's an intent to stay long-term, because that's where trust is broken and bridges are burned. And if that's not the intent, then we go about research differently, or we suggest not conducting research with certain communities. And then again, obtaining the social license to operate, this is a long-term commitment. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, especially with large organizations that already have a reputation and people already have kind of an opinion in their mind. These things take time to turn. That's it. I'm looking forward to answering any questions.
Great. Thank you so much. Now we're going to have Janie share a little bit more about her experience with stakeholder engagement. And remember, please put questions in the chat. We'll have time at the end for Q&A.
Oh, let me get it all cruising. Okay. There we go. Hey, you can hear me, you can see my slides. We're good. Awesome.
Mhm.
Yes, again. So I'm Janie Moore. I'm the founder of Brico Works, and which is a social change organization that helps social impact causes and does organizational design and change design work. I also am the director of impact at the Entrepreneur Fund, and I've held that role for about 6 years now. The Entrepreneur Fund is a CDFI that is based in Duluth, Minnesota. We cover 29 counties across northern Minnesota and northern Wisconsin. So very rural area in the northern states. And we provide lending and advising services to small businesses across this region. On average, we serve about 1,500 to 2,000 people per year. So 800 to 900 businesses each year. And the unique piece about that is when you look at the breakdown of both the population of our region and then the people that we serve about 68% of our businesses are based in rural areas. 64% are women, women-owned businesses, which is a very significant number if you look at the breakdown. And then 15% of our businesses are actually owned by minority BIPOC business owners, which is significant in our area because many of the counties we serve actually have less than 10% or even 5% BIPOC in the area. So just to give some context about the work that we do, there's a broad swath of the work. And some of the key work that we lean into is both around the diversifying our regional economy. So really creating high quality jobs that really sustain and build resiliency across the region. And one of the big challenges that we faced in our work is over the years has been around how do we connect the work that we do and impact evaluation to our team and our stakeholders, our clients, community members in different ways that doesn't just feel transactional. We kept hitting this challenge, particularly with our staff, where it felt like we had to check a box, right? I have to collect the data to check a box to send these funders that I don't really know. And we wanted to make a way that we were all creating a shared consistent meaning around what impact meant to us and how we can then invest our time, energy, resources into that work. And so the why behind really creating our impact framework and our impact rating system was core to these 3 bullets. We wanted to build internal clarity. We wanted our team to feel empowered and know that at the end of the day, the work that they were doing aligned across the board, right? So from A to Z. We also wanted to make sure we were engaging others in this and that we weren't just doing 2 people, but we were bringing them along and talking about what change meant to them. So the entrepreneurs, what does change and success mean to you, and how can we really embed that into our work? And then having that shared consistent language across staff, leadership, board, and the entrepreneurs and the people we work with. And then really finding ways to evolve that and let that evaluation and impact work embed throughout the work and not just become an afterthought. So the way we did this, I'm just getting over a cold, so I'm holding on tight. Hopefully I keep it. Was excuse me. Okay, I think I'm good. We built, we kind of went through a full phase, and none of this is linear like this slide attunes to, right? It's very parallel and ongoing, keeps going through the iterations, but we were really intentional at the beginning to do an environmental scan and do some business engagement. This included 30 to 40 interviews actually with business owners, and taking time to actually sit particularly with our underrepresented business owners, the rural business owners, the BIPOC owned businesses, and dig in to learn what does success mean to you? What does our work mean, and how has that impacted you? And sorry. And then using all of that information, and we looked across a ton of CDFIs and the work that they were doing and how do you measure and talk about that impact. Then we really went along the path of creating an initial framework, but then continually engaging people in the process, and doing an iterative process, which I'll continue on. But again, it's very much an evolving and growing process that we're still deep in. So to think about what our impact framework included, the guidelines, we developed guidelines for impact. So as we were gathering information, both from stakeholders and other CDFIs and business owners, what kept popping was that we needed some clear guidelines that we could continually go back to as we were developing and evolving this system. And I'll share those. We also refined our theory of change to make it really tangible and more understandable about the change that we were seeking to make so that it made sense to our different stakeholders. We mapped that stakeholder list to say who needs to continually be engaged in this process, and not just like a one and done, but over time, how do we continue to loop people in? And then we drafted our impact tools. So those guidelines for the impact framework, which again, we hold these like front and center in all the work we continue to do, but we needed to make sure they were, the impact framework was actionable and measurable. So we're collecting the stuff that we can do things with. Really important was objective and consistent as much as possible, right? We love everyone we work with. We love our entrepreneurs, and we want to bolster them and like sell their impact in a way, but we also have to make sure we're creating tools that everyone can kind of speak the same literacy and language around. We wanted to make sure they were transparent, right? We needed it to be equitable, and transparency is key to that. And then comprehensive. When we work across the board with so many, a wide geography and demographics, we needed to make sure it was a comprehensive tool, scalable and adaptable for our team. So again, through this iterative process, we kind of held those guidelines, and we continually go back to those and say, does this work? What works, what doesn't work, and how do we continue to rectify that? Here's a very visual of our theory of change. I'm happy to share this, but I won't deep dive into it, but it gives you that kind of the big piece where we work with entrepreneurs and businesses to really grow and diversify a regional and resilient economy regionally. And we also build in that economic and justice component. Then to make that tangible, so you take that theory of change, which is still feels high and kind of far away for some. If you're familiar with the 5 C's or the 6 C's of credit that's often used in lending, I tried to make a tool that our team could really hold in a similar way. So we built the 5 I's of impact, and they revolved around what industry business is in, the impact they make on individuals, income generation, innovation scale, and impact on community. So the essential services they bring, or the vibrancy they bring to the community. And that's how we built that impact rating, were questions around those 5 buckets. So how the iterative and the engagement process, again, every step, we engaged different business owners, we engaged staff, board, and I actually worked hand in hand with a cross-functional working group over the course of 6 months to iteratively develop the tools and continually come back and say what works, what doesn't work, how does this align with our guidelines, and does it not? And then we rolled out a beta version to our staff. It was the first impact rating tool was in SurveyMonkey, and we did this nice little deep dive where we taught we had time and space with everyone to talk about what impact meant to them, what our impact drivers were, and how that all aligned. But again, we were very intentional about framing this as version 1, and that they were helping to build and refine that. So we shared the guidelines, the why, and we rolled out beta version 2 based on all their feedback. And I specifically said, this is what you told us, this is what we heard, this is what we've done. So it's been this very intentional process and learning loops. And the next phase that I'm really excited about is what actually came from the group was, how do we share this with our clients and show the impact that they're making in the community? Because they often don't know or realize that impact. So that's one piece I'm excited for. I know I'm at time, so last slide. Goodness, I haven't coughed all day. Of course. Key takeaways. So again, engage early and often. If I could go back, I actually would bring staff along earlier in that environmental scan process and deep dive with clients, but continually engaging. It takes time and energy, but having conversations, like Noemí mentioned, like actually listening to people and connecting with them is vital, and knowing what impact and change means to our stakeholders, being transparent about what impact means, and saying it out loud, and inclusive in the process. Clarity on the why, and repeat it. I think that why slide I had, I've shared 40 times, and I continue to do it, so that it doesn't feel like a checklist, like, oh, another thing we have to do, and then iteration. So that's my key, and similar, I'm excited to answer questions at the end.
Great, thank you so much. I'm already seeing similarities and threads that we'll discuss more as we get to the Q&A and discussion, but it's really neat to see Noemí shared the 10 make or break like non-negotiables, and Janie, you're sharing your guiding principles and guidelines for how you operate. So really neat to see this. All right, I'm gonna stop talking and let Yakuta take it over.
Hi, everyone. So hopefully you can hear me okay and see my screen okay? All right, okay. So thank you so much first to the Social Finance Take for having me here, and also of course to the audience for joining us today. So I'm going to jump right into my presentation with a bit of time travel. But yes, I'm at the William Davidson Institute. I'm actually on the same team as Heather. So we're the performance measurement and improvement team. And we do a lot of customized impact measurement, continuous improvement, learning and knowledge management, and strategy projects. And the mission at WDI is to equip economic decision makers in emerging countries with the tools of commercial success. So with that, let's take you a bit on some time traveling journey. So I'm really glad that my co-panelists went first, because they talked about the nuts and bolts of engaging with stakeholders. I'm going to zoom out a little bit and show you how, through working on this VROI project, where the companies had already done stakeholder engagement management, engagement, they were able to help us develop a more clearer picture on the VROI. So here's the time travel piece. So from 2020 to 2022, a consortium of 6 impact investors came together with IDRC and USAID funding to strengthen the evidence base for gender inclusive programming. So that is the business case for gender lens investing. Now that was G-Search, and WDI was the research partner on that project. And when the findings of that was released back in 2022, we got feedback saying that, okay, great, we understand how you embed gender and women into business models, into operations, but we want to understand the cost of doing so and the return on investment of doing so. And so luckily, because of this work, we were then invited to another consortium that's funded by USAID. It's under the USAID's Feed the Future Market Systems and Partnership Program, which includes DAI and Market Share Associates, MSA, who were working to develop the Women Inclusive Return on Investment framework that highlights 4 key pathways to integrating women in business models and operations. Now, I won't go into the framework today, but I highly recommend a review, and I have the links in this deck. And then hopefully, Heather, if you can share the deck, that'll be great. So while MSA was conducting this extensive literature review and talking to lots of small and medium-sized enterprises in the Global South, what they found was that there's very limited evidence for ROIs of women-inclusive models within SMEs in the Global South. And this was also, of course, corroborated by the feedback we were getting from our G-Search work. So in the next phase of this VROI framework, in the next phase of this project, our goal was to actually calculate the VROI, which was WDI's key role on the consortium. So we worked closely with 2 companies and with their leadership and their employees to identify relevant data, collate it, troubleshoot issues, and then conduct a calculation and write up the section while also working with the consortium to identify lessons in the process. So before I move on, I want to just quickly highlight a couple of things, but I'll take you back one slide. So I want to highlight that, the ROI proves the business case, but it can also be used as exploratory research that a company conducts to understand whether they should go ahead with a pilot on women inclusive operations, and it can help the company with decision-making, with developing their strategy, right? So ROIs are yes for developing business case, yes to attract more funding, but it can also be seen as exploratory research. It can also, be, of course, typically you will see an ROI done before you implement a program, but in our case, we did it after. And hence, we also think it can also be done like after a pilot, for example. So what I will highlight on each slide is that to do this ROI calculation correctly, right, we worked very closely with the companies, but it required them to actually have already conducted their stakeholder engagement to kind of understand, all right, what are the impacts on the women that are part of our operations, that are part of our supply chain, and only then they could actually help us to develop the ROI calculation. So that's very critical to actually get a ROI number that you feel confident in. These were all contribution analysis, so I just want to make sure that everyone understands it's not attribution. But like I said, the calculation is only helpful if you trust it, and it can only be done in a trustworthy manner if you have engaged with stakeholders, if you've disaggregated your data during the time of data collection, as well as analysis by sex. And so that's, I think, one of the key messages I want everyone to take away. And also, what I want to highlight is that and maybe I'll do that in a couple of slides. So let me just introduce you really quickly to the companies and to their models. So Greenwell is a renewable energy company in Ethiopia. And their original model was they had a centralized sales and distribution system where men from the HQ would go into rural Ethiopia and sell clean cooking products. Other renewable energy products would be focused on clean cook stove. So that was the original model. And then they moved from that to a women-centric sales and distribution model where women from the local communities themselves served as sales agents to sell these cook stoves to other women in their communities, because women are the main cooks in the family and the other ones who actually use the product. The other company was Okeba. This is in Uganda. They're an agribusiness company. And here the model was they provided high quality on-site childcare services to their employees that had childcare responsibilities. So in the original model, they had nothing like this. So employees were often having to leave early, or they brought their children to work on the factory floor, and so their children would inhale dust. They themselves would be distracted. So that's the original model. And then the new model is Okeba put on site a childcare services. They had a person watching the children. This was in a room that was in the factory, so the women could, or whoever was responsible for children, could drop their children off and then focus on their work. So like, I think, again, I love that Janie also highlighted the theory of change, because this is also where we started. The very first step of actually calculating the VROI is to ensure that this is a women inclusive business model or operation, and that there are social benefits for the women stakeholder group. Calculating a VROI should be based on an in-depth understanding of the business investments and scrutiny around which elements qualify as women inclusive. So we conducted 1 to 2 key informant interviews with our companies. We went back with lots of questions. We, in fact, even reviewed the theory of change that we developed with the company. And the only way, again, going back to that first point that I made, the only way they could help us write a very clear theory of change is if they understood their stakeholders, they understood the women. So in the case of Green World, they understood their customers, they understood the women who would serve as a sales agent. In Okeba's case, they understood their employees and their needs, and how having the children in the on-site could help the employees. So that stakeholder engagement, that was done, and that's how we could develop a very clear theory of change. And the theory of change, of course, formed the foundation on which we then identified the data that we needed in the ROI calculation. And I'm going to take you through the formula in a second, but what I want you to highlight is that, we're ensuring that this is women inclusive, that there are social impacts on the women, and we are finding financial proxies to account for those social impacts to then include in our ROI. So again, just to highlight, it's really imperative for the company to have done their work of understanding the impacts on their stakeholder engagement, so that we can write a clear theory of change, we can identify the right data, and then we can include that in the ROI calculation. So just to take you through the ROI calculation, we have a very extensive write-up in the 2 case studies, but I wanted to just give you a flavor of it on the call today. The formula is change in profit per unit upon initial investment, right? Where change in profit is profit at end line of the women inclusive model and minus the profit at baseline. So I'll leave you with that quick formula, but what I want to highlight is just the level of granularity of data that is kind of required to be able to do this ROI calculation. So when we talk about, in the case of Green World, understanding, okay, what are the various variable costs, what are the fixed costs, understanding of course, the revenues of the clean cook stoves is one of the simpler pieces. It's the costs that are more tricky, right? So for example, it can be marketing costs, transportation costs, costs of breakage of the clean cook stoves, commissions to the sales agents. That was the model that they used to pay them. All of that granularity of data is so essential to these calculations. And then, of course, the initial investment of the activity requires them, like in the case of Green World, to understand, all right, what is the cost of recruiting the women from the local communities, training them, retaining them, ensuring that there is retention of these sales agents. So all of that is considered as part of the various costs that you have to take into account in this ROI calculation. So moving on, I just wanted to give you quickly, not leave you in the dark. So we did find positive ROI in both cases. So in the case of Green World, we found that for every beer invested, the company got a 7x return. And for Okeba, for every Ugandan shilling invested, the company got a 1.7x return. Now we have, like I mentioned, a very extensive write-up on how we did the ROI calculations for both the cases and the case study. So again, I won't take you through that, but what I want to highlight is these are tremendous results because they continue to build on the positive evidence for gender lens investing. And furthermore, they strengthen the business case for such interventions with quantifiable numbers that immediately convey the value of women inclusive business models. So to close out my presentation, what I want to highlight is that, yes, stakeholder engagement is critical to be able to do the theory of change, which is the foundation of the ROI, which is the foundation of ensuring that this is women inclusive. And I want to recognize that, of course, this requires capacity and capability from these companies, right? To be able to do the stakeholder engagement, to be able to engage with outside researchers, to be able to collect all this data and then make sense of all of it, right? So I absolutely recognize the resource, the burden on the staff, and so, you know, data literacy, success aggregated data collection and analysis, and the learning processes are key challenges during data collection. I'm not taking away from that. And it requires that we develop technical skills amongst these companies. But so having said that, you know, what I want to highlight is that, you know, VRIs, of course, can, like I said, help the company with decision-making in their strategy. It can help the company with exploratory research that they're conducting. In our case, the VROI, because of the experience of conducting this research with us, what Greenwell did was they actually went ahead and invested in a data management platform. So in a database and an online application, which helps them to collect, organize, and use their sales data, right? So we have this interview with the founder of Greenwell, where he's talking about how he has over 230,000 customers. And because of this database and mobile-based application, he now has the ability to check the GPS location, to check customer phone numbers, to check the associated sales agents, all on his mobile phone. And that was really because of the experience of doing this work and understanding how critical data is, how important it is to know your customer, to engage with your stakeholders, including both your customers, but also, of course, your distributors and your sales agents. And in the case of Okeba, you know, what I want to highlight, so there are many lessons again in the case studies, but what I want to highlight over here is that, you know, they had this business intuition, right? Because they were talking to their stakeholders, because they were seeing the women on the factory floor. They knew that putting the on-site childcare center is really helpful, but it was an intuition, it was anecdotal evidence. This ROI calculation actually allowed them to have quantifiable evidence that, yes, our on-site childcare center has contributed positively to the company. It is a solid business case. And so that was also another advantage of doing this. So with that, I will stop and happy to answer any questions, and hope it highlights how stakeholder engagement is really critical for business success.
Great, thank you so much. We have a few questions in the chat, but before we get there, it was really neat being the listening in and kind of seeing the threads throughout that are similar. For instance, like how you guys talk to business and have business care about stakeholder engagement. Janie, it was really interesting to hear that you created the 5 I's of impact, so similar to like the 5 C's of credit, so people understand, and kind of putting it in how they think from the business lens. Yakuta talking about ROI of a program, so the business can then intentionally invest further or expand programming, as well as like share that return with investors who are interested in furthering a focus on this type of work, or with a focus on gender. And then Noemí is talking about like social license to operate. That was very clear on the last slide that you shared. Also hearing a lot about how iterative the process is with your clients, the businesses, as well as with the stakeholders, the learning loop, sharing back with clients. This all sounds like it takes a lot more communication, but important communication. So with that, I'm going to hop to Laura. Had a question for Noemí. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm curious about any insights into how you decided who to speak to and how you got in touch with them. Super tactical question, but as we know, the community can be hard to define and harder to access if you don't already have a presence. And I can tack on a little bit to that question too. Based on this point I kind of brought up before, I'm curious also about how you build that trust with stakeholders by sharing information on the project progress and implementation milestones. Like, what did that look like in practice? And that could also go to Janie too, like by differing your communication to different types of stakeholders. Was it emails, calls, texts, etc.? I'll turn it over to Noemí to start.
Thank you. Excellent question, Laura. We spent so much time thinking about how to do that actually, and it's a full page in the white paper, so I'm probably not going to do the answer full justice with the time that we have, but I will say that in terms of a big part of recruiting stakeholders in the community was making sure that we were working with a local stakeholder engagement specialist. And so the order of operations was to first do our own desk research, like collect as much information as we could just through a screen. And then we started doing some cold calling, like I mentioned, local businesses and nonprofits, and like, all right, who can we like build a kind of a loose connection with in the community? And then we launched our recruiting process for our stakeholder engagement, our stakeholder engagement specialists. And those were the people, and then we kind of like handed the reins over. So we did as much as we could kind of from the outside, and then we handed it over to for somebody who has those local connections and that clout and is already working in the community. And then we shared the data that we had collected to date, and then we deferred to them. Like, what are you seeing? Does this resonate? This is what we saw that people are saying on Facebook or saying on X, formerly known as Twitter. Like, this is what these are the things that we gathered as outsiders. Does this resonate? Is this true? Is this what you're seeing? And so we kind of like validated that information with the local stakeholders, and that with the local engagement specialists, and then they were the ones who were reaching out to their communities to get people to participate in the study. They were the ones who were designing the flyers that we printed, and they were determining like where these flyers should go. One of our local stakeholder engagement specialists in Houston had the idea of like creating a QR code. Like people, we were like trying to put flyers at bus stops, and like we asked her, what are people in the community, where are they standing for a long period of time? Could be the library, could be like a local community center. And so she said, like, if you have this big flyer with like all this copy, you're not going to get people are not going to pay attention. So she had the idea of like, let's make this text bigger. Let's have a big QR code. Let's like simplify the language. And so we did all that in partnership with in each market. And the first market was certainly a test, like, okay, what's working? Where can we get people? We used a lot of the information from the landscape analysis to understand, to your point, what community are we trying to reach? And we had to make some, I don't know, call it compromises or just like narrowing of the scope when we determined who we could and could not reach feasibly and realistically. So in my personal vision, like before we started, I was like, I would love to reach communities of people who are currently unhoused. I would love to be able to enter into that community and understand like those are the people that are, to me, like the most exposed. And a difficult decision was made that like in order for the project to move forward, like it wasn't like we couldn't access that community with the resources that we had. So we clearly defined who we were and were not able or trying to reach. And so that's how we identified the groups of like, we knew that we wanted to reach senior citizens. We knew that we wanted to reach people who potentially were undocumented. We wanted to reach people who were shut in or who were like a little bit more isolated. So that was kind of the compromise of like, maybe we can't commit to reaching people who are unhoused. And I could talk about this forever. I'll just say like, when we kind of went down that path, because we were working with a telecommunications company, we explored different options. Like, could we provide hotspots? Could we provide a device for people to participate in the study? And ultimately, as we're going down these paths, there were some compromises that had to be made in terms of like, okay, is this project going to be a 3-year project, or do we need to kind of limit which parts of the community we're reaching? So twofold. One is like very tailored in each community, and the other one is like handing the baton over to local engagement specialists to like make those calls and to keep us honest in terms of assumptions that we were making and then what they were actually seeing on the ground. But I could keep talking about this. If you have any follow-up questions or want to talk offline, I'm happy to chat.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm noticing we have 5 minutes. I'm going to hop to 2 other questions I see in the chat. Janie, also from Laura, thanks so much for sharing your process. I'm curious about your experience getting business leaders on board or motivated to engage with something like a theory of change or impact framework, which is often unfamiliar and it may not have immediate value to them.
Yeah. Absolutely. And even our staff, I would say there's many people that, even if you aren't in the little realm of impact, these can feel alienating in some ways, or like, that's not my lane. And really the key was using language that resonates. And part of that first round of communications and interviews with folks is I just kept taking like furious notes on how they measured success and what it meant to them. Like, I hire my neighbors, and I build community, I provide a service that others don't. And I just would capture like what's meaningful communications and how do they talk about the impact that they make, and then how do I reconnect that back and then share in a way that is meaningful. So I hire my neighbors. You hired 10 great jobs, and that ripple effect of that family sustaining job is very powerful. So like reorienting in that way. But it's almost to that level of like accessibility and language when you break it down to the simplest components, and you kind of like strip away the jargon and the theory of change and the different things. It makes it understandable to everyone, right? And even I had some moments where leadership or board who had just kind of been like rolling along, and then when we simplified it, they were like, oh, that makes so much sense now. And I'm like, oh, good to know. I'm glad we had that moment to break it down. So I think it's all about taking the time to simplify and reconnect to how they see themselves in the work.
Great, thank you. And we have a question directed to Yakuta. This question comes from Ichiro, and he is asking, do you seek feedback from women stakeholders on the WI ROI analyses that you do? And if so, what kind of feedback do you often receive?
So this question I can answer in so many different ways. So I'm going to try and pack it all in 2 minutes. First of all, in the VROI, because of the scope, because of resources, we depended on the company leadership and their employees to tell us about their engagement with the women, to understand what the impacts on the women were. That being said, once we calculated the VROI and we started sharing our reports on different forums, we got feedback from folks especially in using a feminist evaluation lens, that how do you actually take constructs like power decision making, so women power, women agency, women decision making, and capture that in the ROI. So there has been feedback around that, and finding financial proxies for that is really hard. So should we be doing more about that? We've also, in the Okeba case study, we definitely highlight the lesson that companies need to go back to the women stakeholders and really understand, okay, for example, if they're able to be more productive and able to finish their work in a faster amount of time, so the sorting of the grain, what would they like to do with that time? Do they only want to earn income, or they want to use that time for other activities? So we absolutely recognize that, and we put that in the lesson as well, that companies can go back to their stakeholders and say, this is what we're hearing. What do you want, right? And we've done this in G-Search, where we have 5 case studies where we did actually go back to the women and we wanted to understand the impacts on them, but that's a different project. The VROI, this with the different types of feedback and the lessons we've gained.
Wonderful, thank you. And so with that, we're just at the top of the hour, or the end of this hour. So I'm gonna go ahead and say a big thank you to our panelists for coming and sharing, very aligned with what we're trying to focus on at AEA this year and our conference theme. So much appreciated. The different ways to connect with them is in the chat, and stay tuned. We'll have the recording up on our website as well. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.